War. War never changes.
Some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 30, the Peloponnesian War. What is generally known as the Peloponnesian War is actually the second such war. First, some geography and etymology. The Peloponnese is a peninsula at the southern end of the Grecian mainland. Peloponnese is also the name of an ancient city just north of Sparta, who were the traditional leaders and conquerors of the Peloponnese. As the authors of the primary histories of the war, Thucydides and Xenophon, were Athenian, the title Peloponnesian War indicates the Athenian bias. Athens and Sparta were only 200 kilometers away from each other, accessible through the Corinthian Isthmus, bracketed by the town of Corinth to the west and the town of Isthmia to the east, themselves only separated by a scant 8 kilometers. The supreme fact of both Peloponnesian Wars is the close proximity of the two belligerents. The First Peloponnesian War was fought from 460 to 445 BC as a result of the growth of the Athenian-led Delian League and Athens' continued building of defensive walls, which Sparta objected to. During the previous Persian Wars, the movie 300 memorialized the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, which led the Persians to advance to Athens, which was evacuated and burned by the Persians. Sparta led the united Greeks against the Persians in what is known as the Hellenic League. Athens chafed under the Spartan leadership, as it was their navy that ultimately defeated the Persians in the Battle of Salamis, which kept the Persians from penetrating the Corinthian Isthmus and sparing the Peloponnese from Persian conquest. Sparta feared a strongly defended Athens might be captured or, worse yet, ally with the Persians. During the First Peloponnesian War, the Athenians largely dominated on land and certainly at sea during the war. In fact, the Delian League grew and Athenian allied armies ravaged the Peloponnese until their fleet was defeated, ironically, by the Persians in Egypt. The weakened Athenians and devastated Spartans, or, as they are called by Thucydides, Lacedaemonians, I'm sure I mangled that, agreed to the 30-year peace, ending the First Peloponnesian War. The key provision of the peace, and stop me if you've heard this one before, was that both agreed to not interfere in the internal affairs of each other's respective alliances. The Second Peloponnesian War was instigated as the key city of Corinth, holding the ground separating Athens from Sparta, came into conflict with Athens directly, as a former colony of Corinth, Corcyra, broke off and sought Athenian protection. At the Battle of Sybota, an Athenian fleet proved decisive in defeating the Corinthian navy seeking to retake Corcyra. Corinth was a member of the Spartan-led Peloponnesian League. Then the Corinthians reinforced the Athenian tributary Potidæa when they revolted against Athens. Finally, Athens imposed trade sanctions against a member of the Peloponnesian League, and Corinth demanded action. While the Spartan king argued against war, their citizens' assembly, known as the Ecclesia, voted for war. And, with this, the 30-year peace ended after only 15 years, and Sparta and Athens were again at odds. It was the first real clash between a naval power, Athens, and a land power, Sparta and the Peloponnesian League. Sparta quickly surrounded Athens on land, but the siege proved irrelevant as the Athenian navy kept supplies coming. The Spartans could only manage the siege intermittently. In fact, the longest consecutive period was a scant 40 days. The Athenians selected Pericles as general, or strategos, who advised, wisely, to avoid decisive battle on land and use the navy to strike relatively defenseless outposts as they could to indirectly attrite the Spartan power. But just as this strategy started, a plague struck the overcrowded Athens. Many of the farmers had retreated to her walls in view of the Spartan siege. Pericles and approximately half of the residents of Athens died. It was her most decisive defeat. Cleon, an opponent of Pericles' rather subdued strategy, advocated for a far more aggressive action, but still avoiding a main clash with the bulk of the Spartan-led Lacedaemonians. The Spartans were able to march far to the north of Athens in the area of Thrace. Much as Athens avoided the Spartan armies, the Spartans were keen to avoid the Athenian navy. Here, the Spartans mobilized Thracian cities who chafed at Athenian control, and the Spartans, led by Brasidas, laid siege to the city of Amphipolis, who were isolated and outnumbered. Thucydides was sent in command of a relief force by sea, who arrived the same day that Amphipolis surrendered. At this, Sparta and Athens signed a 1-year truce, with each holding what territory they had captured up till then. Thucydides was blamed for the loss and was tried and exiled from Athens. It must be remembered that Thucydides was an active participant in the politics of Athens and a political ally of Pericles. After the year expired, Cleon arrived in Thrace with 1,200 hoplites and 300 cavalry, with an unknown but certainly higher number of lighter peltasts and irregular forces. He recaptured some smaller towns, and Brasidas, with 2,000 hoplites and 300 cavalry, retreated into Amphipolis to prepare an attack on the Athenians. Cleon, realizing his quantitative and qualitative disadvantage on land warfare, retreated in an unorganized fashion, and Brasidas, seeing this, launched his attack early, taking advantage of the poorly led Athenian retreat. The Athenians were routed, losing 600 hoplites to only 7 Spartans. Both Cleon and Brasidas were killed. Socrates is believed to have fought at the battle. After this, the Peace of Nicias was signed. Spartan and Athenian citizens taken prisoner were returned, and the status quo antebellum, with some minor revisions, returned to Greece. While many members of the Peloponnesian League rejected the treaty, in the absence of Spartan support for their belligerents, their opposition was of little meaning. However, a key provision, the return of Amphipolis to Athenian control, was never implemented. During this time, many members of the Peloponnesian League began to chafe under Spartan dominance, particularly Argos. The Athenians were actively trying to export Athenian-style democracy in the Peloponnese and forming alliances deep in Spartan territory. These Peloponnesian democracies formed what was known as the Argive Alliance. This alliance then marched against Tagia, a scant 50 kilometers from Sparta, and controlling the main road from Sparta to Corinth, which of course led to Athens. Sparta marched immediately and reinforced Tegea. However, this passivity was scorned by the Spartan people, and the Spartan commander Agis was forced to move out of his defensive positions and sought to fight the Argives, who were fighting with reinforcements from Athens and other pro-Athenian Peloponnesian states. Just as Agis was about to attack, he was cautioned by one of his lieutenants to show some patience, as the Argives were on strong defensive terrain. Now the Argive hoplites demanded action, and they quickly forced an attack. Both sides drew forces, and the well-trained Spartan hoplites proved, unsurprisingly, decisive, breaking the center of the Argive forces, who retreated in relatively good order. The pursuit was short-lived and indecisive. The Spartans won, but the Athenian allied forces maintained most of their men. It was, however, a much-needed win for the Spartans, having shored up their waning reputation in the face of Athenian military and diplomatic success. The Argive alliance of democracies disintegrated, and Sparta re-established itself as undisputed leader of the Peloponnese. Soon after, the Athenians embarked upon their disastrous Sicilian expedition. Sicilia was an ally of Athens, as both were Ionian, and was under attack by the Syracusians, who, like the Spartans, were Dorians. The debate in Athens on how to respond was dominated by Alcibiades, who was to command the expedition. He had grandiose visions of seizing all of Sicily, ignoring that Syracuse was just as strong as Athens, and thought the immense resources of Sicily would strengthen Athens enough to seize all of Greece. Before the expedition left, however, Alcibiades was accused of religious crimes, but was allowed to sail to Syracuse with a force of 100 triremes and 5,000 infantry, but a scant 30 cavalry. As soon as he arrived in Sicily, Alcibiades was recalled to Athens to face trial. He instead defected to Sparta. His political opponent and executive officer, Nicias, who likewise was allied with Pericles, took over command of the Sicilian expedition, despite having argued against it. He was reputed to be an extremely cautious general, yet personally courageous in battle. Alcibiades, on the other hand, was extremely audacious militarily and politically. He rejected the Peace of Nicaea and was the driving force behind developing the Argive alliance. He was reportedly a favorite of Socrates, where each saved the other's lives during different battles. Upon the arrival of the Athenians, several smaller Sicilian cities rallied around Nicias and the Athenians, yet he did little with the force he assembled and retreated to winter quarters. Alcibiades convinced his new Spartan allies to quickly reinforce the Syracusians, which they did while the Athenians dawdled. The Spartan commander, Gylippus, on the other hand, wasted little time upon his arrival, quickly assembling a force and defeating the Athenians in several battles, stopping the attack on Syracuse. Nicias then asked Athens for reinforcements, and Demosthenes arrived, but without the requisite forces, and frankly motivation, to change the tide. Nicias was prepared to retreat, but delayed due to a lunar eclipse, which was interpreted as a bad omen. At this delay, the Athenians were trapped and forced to fight a major sea battle in the harbor of Syracuse, which they lost. Having lost their fleet, they marched inland and were hunted down piecemeal by the far superior Syracusan cavalry. By 413 BC, the entire Athenian force was destroyed, and with it, Athens' future as a great power. The Spartans wasted little time, encouraging revolt throughout Ionia. Sparta even allied with Persia, where a disfavored Alcibiades fled after reportedly having an affair with the Spartan queen. Alcibiades then worked to undermine the Persian-Spartan alliance, convincing the Persians to slow-roll their support, arguing that a quick defeat of the Athenians would lead to Sparta being too strong. Thucydides, no ally or friend of Alcibiades, argued that this was always a ploy to allow Alcibiades to return to Athens. The Spartans could not consolidate their advantage. The revolting Ionian states demanded protection, which Sparta could not provide. Other Peloponnesian League members, notably Corinth and Syracuse, were exceedingly slow to bring their now superior navies to bear in the Aegean. Notably, Athens had maintained a sizable reserve of both hoplites and triremes, allowing them to fend off their disorganized enemies. In 411 BC, there was a coup which overthrew the Athenian democracy, and an oligarchy known as the 400 took over, feeling as though the constant changing priorities of the citizenry could not deal with the realities of combat in their weakened state. Alcibiades is believed to have organized the coup from afar, ironically promising Persian fiscal support in return. He would be allowed home to Athens and given command of her forces. Considering his history, this was a bold plan, but Alcibiades was a bold man, and it worked. He argued that no support could be garnered from the Persian princes, nor king as long as the democracy remained in place. A democracy was incapable of making long-term commitments and could be easily swayed by a verbally gifted demagogue. As Alcibiades had held this role previously, his observation, while cynical, was accurate. There were actually two coups, one in Athens and one in Samos, where the 100 remaining ships of the Athenian navy were stationed, very far from Athens, on the other side of the Aegean, just off the coast of modern-day Turkey, and where Alcibiades was located. Alcibiades soon achieved a naval victory at Abydos. Thinking this would be enough to convince the Persians of his strength, he went to win over the local Persian satrap. He was immediately arrested and escaped after 1 month. He had no Persian friends. He was at open war with Sparta. His only route to redemption led through Athens. The Peloponnesians recovered and attempted again to defeat the Athenian navy, and were decisively crushed by a complex plan led, again, by Alcibiades. Sparta, so recently on the cusp of victory, sued for peace, which the Athenians, feeling resurgent, rejected. Having regained command of the sea, Alcibiades then led expeditions throughout the Aegean, using diplomacy, force, and trickery to achieve several victories. After 4 years of the oligarchy and a string of victories, Alcibiades returned home to Athens in 407 to a hero's welcome, but not without his old enemies holding a grudge and waiting their time. Theirs was not long to wait. In 406, Alcibiades struck out yet again to defeat the Peloponnesian navy led by Lysander, who served as the navarch, or naval commander, of the Spartan fleet. At the Battle of Notium, again along the Turkish coast, the two commanders were comfortable in harbor and neither sought battle. Bored with the stalemate, Alcibiades left with a few triremes to aid in a siege and left Antiochus in command with one standing order: don't attack the Spartans, which he immediately did, quickly dying himself and losing a sizable proportion of the Athenian fleet and immeasurably boosting Spartan morale concerning their abilities at sea vis-a-vis the Athenians. Alcibiades was blamed and, yet again and finally, removed from command and banished to Thrace, where he would be assassinated 3 years later. The Spartan confidence was short-lived as the Athenians won against a new Spartan navarch. Okay, here we go. I hate these names. Callicratides. That'll be the last time I say that. Despite losing only 25 ships to the Spartans' 70 lost, a storm kept the shipwrecked sailors from being saved, and 6 of the 8 senior officers of the Athenian victory were tried and executed. Meanwhile, the Spartan loss meant that the far more capable Lysander was yet again in command. Yet again, Athens was offered peace, and again refused it. Athens' strength in the Aegean had firmly pushed the Persians into alliance with Sparta, and Lysander sought the decisive battle at Agospotami, which saw the complete destruction of the entire Athenian fleet through, if Xenophon's account is to be believed, abject incompetence. At this, Athens was hopeless. The Spartans still dominated on land and laid siege to Athens. Absent its navy, it could no longer import food, and the Athenians faced starvation, ultimately surrendering the city in 404 BC, thus ending not only Athens as a great city, but the Grecian Golden Era as well. If there's one war I would encourage anyone to study, it is the Peloponnesian War. This all too brief description gives but a taste of the full range of the instruments of national power, dime, and how it applies to war, the balance of land and sea, of combined arms, cavalry and infantry, of siege and maneuver, of defenses, of tactical patience and rapid audacity. But some of the key aspects of strategy and policy and grand strategy absolutely demand further discussion, which we will go through next week. Thanks for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, please like, subscribe, rate, and comment. Most importantly, share with your friends. Join the conversation at the War 102 subreddit, and check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for links to more information and supporting videos. Send me an email at war102podcast@gmail.com. I look forward to your comments and hope you join us again next week. See you then.